Hey, hello. You're welcoming. No, I'm welcoming you back to the Beat Motel podcast, and I am honoured and a little aroused to be be in the company of Dr. Sam Page,
And
who.
a blackbird who won't shut up.
Oh, it's a blackbird, is it?
Eurasian blackbird.
Eurasian. So I'm in Ipswich, and it's as hot as a badger's arse here. And Sam is in Helsinki. How's the weather in Helsinki, Sam?
Oh, I'd go for maybe a moist cat's arse.
Moist cat. Cats don't get moist. It's kind of like a cat thing that cats don't get moist. They actively avoid it. There was a band in Ipswich called
Even their tongue is dry, isn't it?
There was a band in Ipswich called Hooray for Snakes, which is, for one thing, a great band name. But they had an EP called The Truth Behind Why Cats Don't Like Getting Wet. And it didn't contain any answers at all, which I think was a bit of a letdown. Right, so we have a theme this week. The theme this week is bands who don't translate from stage to record. Explain the premise there, Sam?
It's a bit of it was a really hard one to come up with actually for a playlist, because so many bands do it well of being slightly different things live to record. But it's, I guess there's just like it was more like a thing of like, I have been, and I think there's maybe the first thing we'll play is this band, but I've always been struck how much I enjoy a lot of particularly post-metal stuff live, and I just have no patience whatsoever for it on record.
No patience is such a good way of describing it. My take on it is that I've seen a lot of bands on stage and gone, wow, that's fantastic, especially at festivals, and then gone home and gone, I don't know what they were trying to do here.
It's an interesting thing, because it's also that question of like, how do you capture, because so many bands sort of talk about, they have this one stage presence. Was it the band Howling Rain, whose one of their albums was produced by Rick Rubin, and they had this phenomenal sort of live reputation. And Rick Rubin said, right, well, go off on tour, and we're going to record you after you've played basically the whole album live. And so only when you know it, and I'll get back to this with one of my choices, but only when you know it will we record it. Inside Out will we record it. And we're going to basically try and capture the live performance rather than capture this something that I think a lot of the time the studio becomes quite a tame version of what live powerful band can be.
Right, so before we get into this properly, let's do Riff of the Week. So here is your Riff of the Week. Would you like to introduce it? Because I don't know how to say the band name.
Thantifaxath? No, who knows? They're Canadian. Doesn't matter what their name is.
And the song is called Solar Witch, which, here we go.
Solar Witch.
Whoa. Okay. So why is that your choice? Tell us a bit more about.
I've been waiting to hear someone do that with double kicks for so long. That sort of slowing down and sort of playing with the tempo of it. And it's so nice to hear this. For one, I just love the sound of that sort of pulsation of the double kick, but it's also so nice to actually, so much of the time, heavy metal drums these days can sound like just this machine, which this sort of sounds like a machine going wrong. Yeah, exactly. It's just sort of this rumble of bass drum. whereas this is sort of really playing with this. And there's a weird thing at the moment where I think the black metal scene has got this sort of abundance of really exciting experimentalism going on inside it. And this track, the whole album's great, but this track stands out head and above it because of sort of that just inventiveness this track has with rhythmic sort of devices. And it's so cool to put that into a song and that riff into a song, and it's so unique to my ears at the moment. And it's I just loved it. I just like one of those moments where your ears just go, "What the fuck? That's so good."
That sort of rising intensity is such a tease because it doesn't, it just keeps resetting and going again. And I really like that. I think in our discussions on this podcast, we've often said that I'm often a fan of rhythm before melody. So anything like that. In fact, my riff of the week is quite an old song. I'm trying to think when it was, late 90s possibly. And it's a band that I have always liked because of their rhythms. I've not chosen a particularly good choice of it. I've chosen a song which is I just like a bit of shouting. And this has got some good shouting by I think the singer was Glaswegian. And when you spoke to him personally, it was proper thick accent. So the band is Prolapse, which when the internet first became a thing, I learned very quickly not to image search for. And the song is from an album called Ghosts of Dead Airplanes, which again, I love titles like that. And it's called The Government of Spain. And I think you probably could have guessed that when you listen to it, because here we go. If you saw the guy, I might not even be 6 feet tall, but I'm quite a big person, and just hearing him screech like that's just brilliant. And I don't know what the government of Spain did to upset them, but
I've been going through what I love. I was listening to the Ezra Furman and Laura Jane Grace.
Oh, you heard that on Six Music?
Yeah, I'm sort of slowly going through it, but they played this wonderful singer, but I didn't like the music was a bit low key for me. Something Cummings. She used that voice so amazingly, and it just reminded me. And then I think another choice was that English band, the Idols, and I just couldn't get into Idols because he just seemed to be doing the same thing every song, and it just made me miss. I really like people who aren't afraid of doing weird things with their voices, who aren't particularly fantastically trained. And that's great. He can't sing amazingly, but Prolapse guy can't sing amazingly, but he's trying to do something interesting. He's trying to create some sonic texture with changing up his voice a bit.
I think his name was Mick Derrick. I think his name was Mick Derrick, which is just such a... I can't think of a more British name than Mick Derrick. But also, different take on it, but that was another Ascending Parts track, wasn't it?
Yeah,
different production and whatever, but that's quite a lovely coincidence. Right, so let's... just before we move on from talking about idols, because it is in context to this show, this episode, got to know them really well because they're A-listed on Six Music here, so all their songs when they first came out were played, all the singles, and they are undeniably songs, versus choruses, and they popped up on Glastonbury around the same time because the BBC, I think, essentially funds Glastonbury Festival, and live they don't with just screechy delay soaked guitars that with very structureless, but with driving drums. And I don't know if that when they get into the studio, that's when they then sort of turn essentially these jams into songs. But I was really surprised. I was like, wow, I just thought they'd get up there and play the hits. But right, so here we go with our first song. This is one of Sam's. It is Albert Ayler, and the track is DC. Have I got that the right way around?
Yeah, Albert. I would say Albert Ayler, but Ayler makes sense as well.
Okay, here we go. We're back to the forbidden music again, Sam. So I just want to give a shout out actually to Brighton the Corners, the festival. They kindly told everybody about the reviews I did of the Brighton the Corners festival. And I wonder how many people who listen to those episodes have now just switched off, kind of starting with extreme black metal, going to Prolapse, whatever they were, and then playing that. But oh, come on, Sam, just tell us, was that a live recording? Was that a studio recording?
Oh, it's live recording. It's jazz. It's pretty much all live. But that was done probably in a studio. I don't know much about that, but it's more like it's not really against Albert Ayler. It's more like against recorded free jazz. And there's an aspect where it's such a ridiculous. There's an aspect of free jazz where it's live, it can be this really involving, intense, it's all about the moment. And to me, that's what a lot of free jazz and free noise stuff is. It's all about the moment. It's not really about trying to capture this thing to then replay it. It's not, it is just this intensity of the moment. And there are some free jazz records that are sort of spectacular. And I really like the Ornette Coleman stuff. But it's also, it's never a calming listen. But then just generally,
go to sleep, child. Listen to this.
This will lull you to sleep. Generally, it's not just something I think translates well to record because it takes you outside that moment of intensity. And to me, free jazz is such a sort of moment of intensity that it just doesn't translate that well to a recorded sentiment. That's my sort of my bugbear with recorded free jazz stuff, because it's all. And there's a point where, with that, it is just people scrawling and hitting each other, which doesn't make sense out of a context.
I wonder whether there'll be. Sorry.
No, go for it.
I wonder whether there might be a shift in the way the public views recordings versus live, because the industry model for 30 years, from 50s to 2000s, was get band in studio, record stuff, send them out on tour so that more people buy the recorded stuff, because the recorded stuff was where bands made money, and that was just the way the industry worked. But now with streaming, the revenues are so tiny, and I'm not just talking about my own revenues, they're so small that bands are quite openly saying, look, we make money from merch and playing live now. And I wonder if that will make them more conservative with their recordings, or try and get them closer to, the recordings can then become an advert for the live experience, whereas previously the live experience was an advert for the recordings.
Well, for me, for my money, in the last few months, I've sort of discovered I've never really understood the point of live albums to an extent, and then
it's contractual fulfillment, I think, usually.
Yeah, there was a sort of rediscovered Sam Cooke, who's the original soul singer, the guy who sort of invented soul in some ways, or defined a lot of its shape. And they sort of put out an album after his death. They can't remember when they put this album out, but he's got his recorded studio material is hit and miss. This live album is just fucking phenomenal. What's it called? Sam Cooke live album, and it's him in a small club, just sort of. He sounds like he's barely breaking a sweat, but he also sounds like the hottest thing going. Live albums. Sam Cooke live at the Harlem Square Club, 1963, released 1985. So it was a really discovered thing.
Wow.
Yeah, and then I also got an Otis Redding live album, and that was sort of again he did two live two live albums that are known. At least I know about two live albums. Sam Cooke live album. Oh, he's got quite a few. I've got In Person at the Whiskey Go-Go. So he did a live album with. It was an interesting sort of aspect that soul singers would do these live albums with really like the best live band going. So maybe Otis Redding would go on tour with his own band and then do a live album with Aretha Franklin's band because they were just considered better musicians, tighter, and so on and so forth.
That's got
but there's something, but there's something about these bands that are touring together and they're playing together every night that they just click and they sync so much. And that's happened with the Sam Cooke one. That happened with the Otis Redding live at the Whiskey Go-Go. They're just so in sync with one another. And on this In Person at the Whiskey Go-Go, he does a cover of Papa's Got a Brand New Bag, which, for my money, blows anything James Brown's version out of the water completely, even if Brown wrote it. And I always think that, of course, maybe, and that goes back to this idea, like the records with the advert for the live album. But these days, when you can't sort of go back to see these bands, they're now sort of this lauded thing. When I was working at this record shop here in Helsinki, in came this David Bowie live album that was recorded on the same tour as his big live album. What's it called?
I don't know.
Excuse the screeching.
Pterodactyl.
But what's it? David Bowie live album. He did one with Adrian Belew as lead guitarist. Stage, that's it. Double album, Stage. Adrian Belew's as lead guitarist, and it's the same tour, but this one is called. It was a bootleg live in Bergen, a really good soundboard recording from late 1970s, and unlike the Stage album, where they obviously know they're recording it to be released as an album as a contractual obligation. In this live at Bergen, which is just this bootleg, Adrian Belew goes off, and he's one of the most individual guitarists. And this is like 1970s, and it was just, he had just joined Bowie from Frank Zappa's touring band, and he was just absolutely incredible. And I urge people, if they like Bowie, to find this Live in Bergen album bootleg. It's got to be out there somewhere, but it's just he's so good on it.
God, bootlegs is almost a whole topic by itself, isn't it?
Yes.
Right, so we're going to move on now. Slightly different genre, slightly different type of thing. You're talking about the very best and the most talented. I'm going to play you a band which I put on a few times here in Ipswich. I think they're from Brighton. They're called the Phil Collins 3. Have you heard of them?
Oh, yeah.
So live, they were just wild, really exciting. So I'm going to play it's the only recording I could find, and I think it is the only recording they ever released, and it was on a compilation. It wasn't even this is all bands release stuff now as soon as they start, but people didn't used to record for a few years after forming a band. So here is, I'm not going to give you the title because it's going to give away the song. So that was Pooey Stick by the Phil Collins 3. Now, clearly,
There's
when I saw
harmonies going on there.
but clearly, like, when I put them on at the Steamboat Tavern in Ipswich, they didn't have the full youth choir thing. But I think it's incredible that they managed to even do that. And live, they used to dress up. They used to like stuff things in their clothes to make themselves look misshapen, and they'd build these amazing stage sets. Like they did like city skylines. And the amount of effort they went into, and it was such a brilliant experience live that when I first heard that recording, back when it was made, I was like, oh, come on, it's they just apparently they were courted by major labels briefly, who then got terrified by the prospect of trying to make money out of something like that, and ran away. But what a bonkers song! That is pretty much the entire song at 30 seconds as well. So they burn intensely but shortly. But as you say, it was difficult to choose tracks for this, and I really didn't want to choose a band and then have that band think, well, we did try. So I just wanted to just choose something that was a complete wild card and just miles off. Right, so let's go for your next selection, which is Matt Watt. Do you want to say, tell us what the song title is?
Oh, I need to get it up first.
You got to look it up. I'll just say it. It's Baby-Cradling-Tree-Man.
Rise, I settle. The mouse marching backwards. A root like a tail. Dangling downwards. Cradling the Acachan. Cradling the Acachan. Cradling the Acachan.
I thought it was Cradling the Packaging when I first heard it, but it's Packaging. That
who knows what Mike Watt's saying?
So Mike Watt, the Minutemen, and this album, all the songs are really, really short. It sounds like he was trying out ideas. Tell us a bit about this album.
Well, no. One of the things I loved about the Minutemen and this album was sort of written in memory of, in a way, of the Minutemen. I always love the sort of the shortness of the Minutemen, because it is like being confronted by just these really sort of amazing ideas, and it's not like a grindcore album where you're just confronted and assaulted by things going on 100 miles an hour. These are sort of melodic ideas that they have all sorts of shapes to them, and it's very really entertaining listen. And this album was the first. He said, Mike Watt said, it's the first album he tried to write since the demise of the Minutemen because of D. Boone's untimely death in the mid to late 80s. He tried to write like a Minutemen album, and he did this trio, and he did it as the thing to basically advertise his touring. But the thing is that I think they had just got figured out the songs, and we saw them pretty early on in this sort of touring circuit. He toured this album for years, and we saw him at ATP pretty early on, and it was Yeah, it was a bit empty and it was a bit like, oh, and I was really trying to love it because I love so much of Mike Watt's output. He's so endlessly interesting as a musician, and as a bassist who likes punk rock and jazz, he's so sort of a good place to find yourself sort of trying to be inspired by. And then this album came out, and then they played this album on, like, they went through a massive tour in the US, and then they brought that tour to the Europe, and they played every tiny like venue. It was really long touring, like Mike Watts occasionally does. And he did this thing. He played Brighton, and it was this three-piece. And it was such a beautifully constructed show because by that point they knew the songs inside out. Whereas when they were recording the album, it sort of feels quite like they're still trying to feel out what things are. So the louder points live, the louder points were louder. The quieter points were so much quieter. Like they had this really nice bit where they just were still making a noise, but they were barely touching their instruments. And then they just bring it back full volume. And it was so sort of like dramatic and everything I wanted that album to be live. And it's just, it's such a shame to me that they never produced a live version of that record because the studio version feels so quiet and so tame, so sort of so
It's nice.
safe.
It's
compared
to
nice
and safe, isn't it? That always surprised me. I mean, okay, so let's move on to the next track. Now, the next track, we struggled earlier with saying Thantifaxath for your riff of the week. This is a bit of an obvious choice for me for a band that live I really enjoy, but on record I don't really bother with, and it's Sunno. And the song is, I'm going to try and say this, the song is Big Church, and then in brackets it says Megasensel Telsi Essen Selges DS Esseken Esseke Tekethekert. And that's, I'm not reading the accents above the E's correctly or anything, but well, man, let's just. Right, so
yeah, 5 chords there.
I tend to think with Sunno on record, I think, cool, that's a great guitar sound, and then I spot a fluffy dog outside and get distracted. It doesn't, for me, production is amazing. And the first time I saw Sunno was with you at ATP in Butlins in Minehead, and absolutely astonished by just the volume, and it's a whole body experience. And I apologise if I told this story on the podcast before, but I was thick with cold and it cleared my sinuses out. And it was such an ethereal, weird experience. I ended up down at the front, just sort of transfixed by these cloaked figures in all this thick smoke. And at the end, they took their hoods off and bowed and all that stuff. And that's when I noticed that one of them I'd met before. He'd been queuing up with us for the flumes at the swimming pool at Butlins in Minehead that morning for a good couple of hours. And I can remember him because he was the only person queuing up to go down the flumes wearing tighty whities that had gone see-through. He didn't have any swimming equipment, any swimming trunks or anything. So, yeah, it did take the shine off the mystery.
You're going to have to do it in your pants.
yeah, like forgetting your kid at school. But to be honest, I haven't really got much more to say other than Sunno live. I'd go again, but on record, I don't understand.
Did they have? I think they had at ATP. I think they had one of the aspects I loved about them live was sort of the ridiculousness of it, because they have they make it like they have so many amps on stage that they make a semi Stonehenge, half circle Stonehenge out of their amps. So they have these massively tall, probably bass cabs, and then these guitar amps, probably orange. Or
no,
a mixture
Sunno.
of things, because
Sunno,
yeah.
hence the name.
They make such. And I remember seeing them in Brighton. Last time I saw them was in Brighton. I went from being so fucking annoyed with them to being absolutely transfixed, and I go from sort of like just the magic being broken. Then a few seconds later, I was completely in their world, and then a few seconds, and then a few minutes later, I just wanted to go to the pub. Fuck this, and then. But yeah, record live. I'm just. What's the point? Because part of the problem with this band and like a few of these other things, part of the problem with Sunno Live is that you can just turn the volume down. You know, when you're home, you're like, yeah, okay, I'm just going to listen to it. It's just going to be white noise in the background. A chord every 5 minutes.
It's on the forbidden music list in my house, very much so. Right, let's move on. I am going to your choices, and this is a band you and I have seen together, and I first saw. I'm going to tell you later. Here you go. Hello? Is anything happening? Whoa, Deafheaven with Vertigo. Tell us a bit about that, Sam.
I think it's sort of like I think I said earlier that there's parts of post rock and post metal that I just do not get on record whatsoever. And I remember going to see Deafheaven at what was it? It's the UCU, University College Union in London with you.
Yeah, that's where you and I went together. Yeah.
Yeah, and sort of going, whoa, this band's got like there's so much sort of. They're so good live, and that sounds great on record. I can't deny that. They're recorded very well. I just do not have the patience for sort of 6-7 minute tracks, which is where I get. It's like there's an aspect of because I and maybe this is sort of partly to do with my bad listening habits of trying to do stuff whilst I'm listening to stuff, but. I just don't have the patience for it because I'm not good with delayed gratification. I want my shit now, and frankly, the Minutemen and punk rock and most death metal stuff gives me what I want immediately. There's no hiding around it. Whereas there's this sort of we're going to strum a few chords for 5 minutes, and then we're going to go into a blast beat. And I just, and live, I found it very profound and very moving. But
see, I'm the total opposite. I think I love that. I wouldn't want all the songs to be like it. They're the new album by Gay Rear. I absolutely love, and the first track has that noodling around kind of come on, get on with it thing, but it builds up the tension so nicely that when the song does kick in, it's so powerful. After that, you can just skip through the songs. Every single one of them starts, on full tilt, and that's great. But I think a little bit of kind of light and dark is I'm a big fan of that album. When I first heard Deafheaven, I first saw them at Heaven actually in London. I think I listened to it at the gym. Because for the gym, it was so perfect. It didn't require enough of my attention to really get the nuances of it, but it had enough drive and went on long enough that if I was doing 10 minutes on the tracks were long enough that I was doing 10 minutes on a treadmill or something, I had something that just sort of neatly fitted the whole length of it. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. I understand that, and I think, we should come back to exercise and heavy music.
Exercise and heavy music. There's a good topic for a podcast. Right, I'm going to go for I'm going to go for my last choice, and then after that, we're going to go for your last choice. So here is my last choice. I can't see the full title of the track. Right, here we go. I've got.
This microphone turns sound into electricity. Can you hear me now? Out on Route 128, you're dark and lonely. I got my radio on. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
So that is Shellac with The End of Radio. And I chose that because, we talk about ATP a lot on this. It was an ATP, and they started that track, and the drummer... Yeah, we've moved on from Against Me. But the drummer was at the back of the room hitting that snare, and he walked through the room, and the performance of Shellac was just so brilliant. I rushed home and I've got to get that album, listened to the album, and just kind of went, but I don't know. It's just, it didn't connect. And it's Steve Albini. I mean, the man is he's produced some pretty amazing bands and has a unique sound. But I am going to alienate some of my band members by saying on record, Shellac don't thrill me, but live.
You want to play my last track, and that way
I'm going to play your last track, Sam, because then we'll have a proper discussion.
Yeah.
Come on, play your fucker. Go on, Sam, who was that?
That was Shellac with Steady As She Goes, I think from the same album.
It's the same album, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm completely with you. I remember that gig where they were playing, when the drummer walked through the stage, walked through the crowd rather, playing, and they're such a powerful live band, and I completely agree with you. And then you get the record, and it just sort of sounds flaccid somehow. It's like
flaccid.
The power of them live just is not there recorded. And I think it's partly to do with Steve Albini's current philosophy on recording. I was listening to an interview with him that's doing the round. I think it's on YouTube, and he said when he recorded the Pixies, and maybe when he recorded Nirvana, he was sort of, I'm not so sure about the Nirvana thing, but when he was recording the Pixies, he was much more, he was trying to figure out still his role as a producer, engineer sort of person. And he hadn't settled on this idea that he was just there to set up the situation and record the person. He was there. He was still sort of going, oh wait, maybe you guys could try this. Maybe you guys, sort of this much more traditional producer role. And apparently, he felt uncomfortable with his sort of spotlight when the Pixies were asked some questions about production sounds. Apparently, he just felt quite uncomfortable with the Pixies going, "Oh, that's Steve's idea, so you should ask him." And there's this sort of aspect of this idea he has of like sonic honesty as a recording, and I think
sonic honesty.
Yeah, and I think he seems quite a belligerent fellow, and for my money, he is not unless you're an amazingly powerful band, and maybe that's why Nirvana's Neutro is so good. He's not the greatest person to record with, in my estimation, because he is not going to use that studio as this desire for sonic honesty misses the point that the studio in itself is. Maybe I haven't read enough of his stuff, but it's manipulating everything anyway.
Yeah, studio's an extra instrument, isn't it?
Yeah, and in my opinion, and this is a thing that I think, and that's why sort of Shellac they just sound a bit mono. They sound weirdly. They're not compressed, but they just don't sound exciting live. I mean, they don't sound exciting recorded, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm going to listen to it again, actually, I've got to say, because just then when we were listening to that 30-second clip, and any new listeners, we can't play more than 30 seconds, otherwise we get our bollocks conquered by PRS. That's not the right phrase, is it? But I quite enjoyed that. And I think it might be because as we record this, Sam, you're in Helsinki, I'm in Ipswich, and the sound is a bit ropey today for us. I mean, it should be fine on the podcast, but it gave it a bit of grit that I think the actual recording is missing. I was like, oh, okay, no, I quite enjoyed that.
I know. For me, what it put me, I did enjoy that, and I was just like, but it reminded me so strongly of seeing them live, rather than having any sort of like, if Shellac were playing, next week, I'd go and see them again on the basis of listening to those records and reminding me how good they are live. Would I buy the next Shellac record that comes out? No, I can't be fucked.
Well, this is the interesting thing. The point of this episode isn't these bands are great live and shit on record. It's not that at all. It's just the connection to us in a very subjective way is very different. And some bands, like I mentioned Idols earlier, live, I think they are actually a different band. They sound different. It's completely different translation of whatever it is they are trying to do. Right, Sam, I need to wind it up there. So I'm going to throw a new segment at you that I've not told you about at all. And I was thinking we can try this at the end of each episode. And I'm going to ask you to do, for 60 seconds, something I'm calling Sam's So What segment. So in 60 seconds, can you give us a summary of the entire episode? And I'm going to tell you when to start. Start now.
I think you've already done that the best. This is our subjective relationship, and this is, I guess, about how maybe seeing a band live and then being so good live can ruin those recorded experiences of trying to reproduce that at home. And that reproduction at home doesn't always work that well, and also brings into question of what the live experience should be versus what the recorded experience should be. And it would have been so much easier to.
Sorry, that was 30 seconds. Finish your thought though, because I liked where you're going with that.
It would have been so much easier, and one of the reasons I liked this idea was it was so much easier to pick bands that were better on record than live, frankly. And to pick bands that actually would go and see live. I'd see Sono live again. I'd see Albert Ayler live in a heartbeat. I'd see all of my choices I would go and see live again. I would tread very carefully around their records.
It's interesting that when we were picking the tracks here, I thought out of any of the topics we've done, this would be the one that if I was in one of these bands, I'd probably be the most pissed off or frustrated about. Because so much work goes into the studio, so much to have a couple of kind of blokes go, well, I don't. That would be the one that I was, oh shit, I don't want some of these bands to find about this and come and duff me up. But it is, as you say,
it is subjective, and also this is the point of criticism. Who said? Who was this arsehole writing about music?
I thought you were going to use that. Every like opinions, everyone's got an arsehole. Just don't get it out in public.
Writing about music is like dancing about architecture.
Yes.
And
who was it?
It's given. It was made popular. It's commonly attributed to Laurie Anderson and Elvis Costello, but actually Costello himself credited to a comedian called Martin Mull. And a variation, this is from Wikipedia, says talking about music is like singing about economics. And
Love it.
the thing is that I sort of, that's comedy and that's explain the joke, but it will ruin it. But the thing is that criticism isn't there to sort of say this is shit. It's there to sort of go, everybody critiques their own stuff. And so I just think it's quite fun. And, none of these bands, I give my left nut to do what some of these bands do, particularly I would say live. Particularly live.
I think that is a good summary. Let's call it quits there. Anything more you want to add before I press the big stop button? I think you've added quite a lot. Shall we just... I'm going to say goodbye. Do you want to say goodbye? Or sing us a little song or something? He doesn't look
I can't think of any songs about economics at the moment.
There is one, but I can't remember it either. Let's just say goodbye. Bye.
Hello.